So to everyone watching, welcome to our virtual author reading series with Miss Emma Foster. I'm gonna let her introduce herself and kind of talk about her memoir, and then she's going to read an excerpt. If you guys have any questions at all for her, drop them in the comments. And at the end, we'll read any of your comments out loud, and you can ask her pretty much anything. So go for it.
Hi guys, I'm Emma and I wrote The Lies I Told Myself, which is a memoir about my journey through kind of young adulthood, figuring out, navigating through life and through some really tough situations. I wrote it a few years ago, kind of over the last few years. So it has been a work in progress. And I was just going to read the beginning chapter part to you guys. Okay. So I wrote this book in loving memory of my other mother, which is kind of hard to explain exactly who she is, but she's somebody who raised me for a lot of my life. She was kind of like an adopted mom, not legally to me, because my biological mom was also always in the picture. And the prologue goes like this. As I finished writing the last chapter of this book, my son, waiting patiently by my side, asked, "Are you almost done, Mommy?" To which I replied, "I just finished it." He looked at me, his eyes sparkling with admiration, big, bright, and blue, like a summer day full of hope, the kind of hope my mama always had. He smiled and said, sweet and softly, in the most angelic way, almost as if my mama was speaking through him, "You made it." I wrapped my arms around his tiny warm body and pulled him into my chest. I whispered in his ear, "And you will too, baby." So chapter 1, I never had an aha moment. I lied. I lied so much that I even started to believe the things I was telling people. I lied to my boss, my family, my closest friends, my boyfriend, and worst of all, I was lying to myself. It got so bad that by the time the truth came out, it was like the knob on the sink had broken off, and I couldn't stop it all from pouring out. It came out in tears, bouts of anger, depression, shame, guilt, and severe anxiety. That's when I realized I had to do something. I had to change. The change I needed wasn't external. It was instead something inside of me. I can't tell you the exact moment. I never had an aha revelation, but I can tell you the moment when the story I was telling myself had started to fall apart right before my eyes. It didn't happen when I got evicted from my first apartment for not being able to pay rent. It wasn't when I spent Christmas alone at the embarrassment of my family seeing me with throbbing black eyes. It never clicked when I got fired from my job for the second time because my boyfriend had beat me up the night before, causing me to miss work. It was 5 years ago when I received a phone call that would forever change my life. I remember it so clearly. I could play what happened over in my head like a movie I watched 100 times. It was early January, and my mama had been missing for about a week now, with no trace to where she might have gone. I sat in my apartment with a swollen, broken nose and a fat lip from the last time my boyfriend took his anger out on me, and little hope left in my heart when my phone rang. It felt like I had been walking through a deep, dark tunnel for months, a tunnel with no light at the end, the kind that you feel stuck in, lost, and unsure that you'll ever make it out, and even more unsure how you got there in the first place. The sound of that telephone ring, it rattled my entire tunnel. The people on the other end of the line told me, her voice shaking, that he was dead. Her boyfriend had shot himself in the head. It wasn't that he committed suicide that mattered to me, as cold-hearted as this sounds. They had barely started dating. Maybe it had only been 2 years. He wasn't in my life long, and even when he was, I never made an effort to get close to him. It just never felt right. It was dark outside, and the tears streaked our cheeks as we tried to catch our breath from laughing. My mama was sitting on the floor in front of me, beer in hand, and the biggest smile sprawled across her face. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see him, sitting and quiet outside of her circle. He just watched, always lingering in the background, but he never joined in her laughter. He never mattered to me. It was the fact that in that moment I knew my mama was gone. She was never coming home. I knew her boyfriend had killed her. The woman I looked up to, the woman that had raised me for a large part of my life, the one I leaned on and counted on, loved with my entire being, had just been murdered, and like a stone thrown into a glass house, my foundation crumbled. When she got ripped from my life, something inside of me forever changed. The innocence I held onto was gone, and telling myself I was happy no longer made sense. I was happy and everything was fine. In reality, I had spent the last 2 years in an abusive relationship and was sitting on my couch with black eyes and a broken nose, realizing one of the people I loved the most had just been murdered by the same type of man I thought I was in love with. I spent a lot of time sitting in the darkness, trying to hide from my own shadows. These were the years that shaped a large part of who I am today. What's going on outside of you in the external world is a direct reflection of what's going on inside of you. And I was seeing a lot of tragedy. The storm that was inside of my heart and my head was creating a tornado of chaos in what I was experiencing in the world around me. Suffering is an obsession of self. We rationalize the bad decisions we make by lying to ourselves. If we don't admit to ourselves what is wrong, we don't have to face the trauma that is causing our behavior. So we disassociate. Facing ourselves is often our biggest battle. At least it was for me. Most of us, we will do whatever we can to avoid the feeling of a sledgehammer knocking down the walls we built around our heart, because when that happens, all the pain comes pouring out. So we keep our walls up and we build them higher and move farther away from ourselves, and we don't come back until something forces us to snap out of it. And that's what happened to me. But it was never an aha moment. It was like a domino effect or a ripple in the water. The ball dropped on my sky-high wall, and piece by piece, its vibrations led to the end of it all. And in the end, I die. Everything that I was not, everything that was the old me, it died, and in the end, I became what felt like an entirely new person, a happier, freer, more grateful person. It was the end to the suffering and the beginning to the learning how to feel the love that had always been there, the love I always truly needed, the love I had for myself. So I'm going to tell you my story of the journey that took me to a place where I had lost it, and of course, where I found it again.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions they want to drop in the chat? If not, I have a plethora of questions for you to talk a little bit more. So give anyone a little time to drop some questions. Literally ask her anything, guys. Anything.
Oops.
All right. Then I have some questions while we're kind of waiting here.
Okay.
What inspired you to write your book and say, this is my story and I need to tell it?
When I started writing it, I didn't actually have any intention of sharing it. It was more of a healing process for me. So writing has always kind of been my way of getting things out. Like in high school, I wrote poetry, and I have like a whole notebook full of stuff that I used to write. So it really kind of just started out as I need to get this out of me and somewhere else.
What would be your biggest tips to any would-be and inspiring writers out there right now?
I would say just to do it and get started. It doesn't necessarily have to make sense at first. It can be messy. you don't have to write at the same time every day. You don't have to write like a certain amount each time. I would say let it flow, because for me, inspiration came at weird moments. And sometimes it was when I couldn't sleep at night, so I would get up and I would write. Or sometimes it was when I first woke up in the morning and I just had something I needed to get down on paper.
How much of a time commitment would you say being an author is, and how do you balance that time commitment with if you have a family, another job, or any schooling, anything like that?
I would say it depends on the day. Not every day is a huge commitment, but it is something that you really want to take the time to consider. Because I would say the commitment is not so much of a bunch of time every day, but a consistency over a long period of time.
Was there anything when you were writing your memoir that you were like, ooh, I don't know if I want to put this in here, or, you put it in initially and then took it out in the editing process, anything like that?
There was a lot of stuff, especially just because my book is very personal. There's a lot of stuff I did write that when I was getting closer and closer to it being published, I kind of freaked out about. But to kind of counter that, I did change everybody's name in the book. And there are some little things in the book, like places and things like that, that aren't the same in real life, so that you can't necessarily tie it back.
Which makes sense.
Yeah.
When talking about domestic violence in your book and, being in a relationship like that, seeing your mother in that relationship, can you kind of elaborate more on what you would tell any survivors that are watching this as kind of like advice on how to deal, how to get out, where to go for support, and that kind of thing?
So definitely get support. Use your resources. And I know sometimes it doesn't feel good to admit that you need help, but we all need help. And when you go through something like that, I mean, you're going to heal on your own and you're going to find your own ways of healing, but really get professional help. Going to therapy and then also working with programs locally made a huge difference for me. And I am involved now as a volunteer with a local shelter. So um, definitely seek out the resources. They are there.
Were you ever worried that, you'd publish something in the book and your friends or someone in your family would be like, oh my God, I didn't know that happened to you. Like, why didn't you tell me? Did you get experience any of that when after your book was published?
I experienced a lot of it. And some of it was harder to deal with than other things. I think the people who are closest to me, that was the hardest. Because actually, there's a lot of things in my book that happened that I never talked about. So it was kind of, I think, shocking to some people at first, or then people who meet me and then read it and they're like, oh my gosh. And it's like, well, I don't want you to see me differently. Like, I'm still who I am, but this is part of what made me who I am.
We have a comment from Marie Jones, 4103, who says, thank you for being so brave to share your story. Where have you found the greatest strength?
Inside. It really comes from inside of yourself. And I know that sounds so cliche, but just, I really believe that we all have the strength to do the things that we need to do. And we all have, that light and that love inside of us. And I think sometimes we just get blinded by outside circumstances or by other people or social media that make us forget.
Awesome. Let's see. I'm trying to read my question. What is something you learned about yourself during this memoir process that maybe you didn't really know before writing it, or you were like, I just don't want to deal with this. I'll just, talk about it in my book, and might not have processed it before, and you kind of worked through it in that book process.
So there's a lot of things. When I actually started writing it, like I knew that it was going to be a healing process and I knew I needed to get it out, but I didn't realize how much of that stuff I really didn't deal with and how much of it I didn't process fully. So I had actually done therapy before I started writing the book. And when I started writing it, I had to go back because there were just some things that were really hard to deal with. And I realized some of the things that I was dealing with more on a personal level, like I would get crazy nightmares. It's something I still sometimes happens. I didn't realize that it was actually related to the things that I went through.
Makes sense. I would say that's always a tough thing is to connect, what all is happening in your life to you're like, oh, that's related to that one really bad thing that happened. Cool. Now we know how to deal with it a little bit more. Um,
Yeah.
your book also talks about your move, being evicted and then moving into the big city. Can you kind of talk a little bit more about that experience, and how to kind of get yourself maybe out of, what to do, I guess, in an eviction thing, how to get yourself out of that situation and actually be able to move into a new city and clearly get back on your feet and live life again.
I think the biggest thing is to have patience with yourself and not try to deal with everything at once. Things are extremely overwhelming when something like that happens. So you think about all these little things that you need to take care of or that you need to do, and you really just have to take one little thing at a time, one day at a time. And things eventually do always work themselves out, as long as you are trying. And anything that you do wrong or that you mess up on, you can always move past it and move forward. It's really scary when you're going from one place you didn't really know anybody. So I grew up in Montana, but then I moved to Denver, and that's when that happened. And then I came to Reno. So I like went from one place I didn't know what I was doing to another place that I didn't know what I was doing. Um, and I would also say just be very, very mindful of the people that you surround yourself with, because unfortunately, I made not the greatest decisions in that. And that's part of what made it such a struggle for me. But if you can surround yourself with really good, supportive people, it'll make the whole process a lot easier.
If anyone has any more questions, go ahead and drop them down below. Otherwise, I have no further questions. Do you have any closing thoughts, closing wisdom, advice, anything?
I would just like to say if there's anything that you're thinking of doing, whether it's writing or moving or getting out of a bad relationship, just do it. You can figure out all the little things later.
Do you want to tell everyone where your book is available to publish if you guys liked what you heard and want to read more?
Yeah, so if you go to my Instagram, the link is directly on there, but you can find it on Amazon. It's available in Kindle and paperback. And if you just look up The Lies I Told Myself by Emma Foster, it'll pop right up.
Awesome. So if you like what you heard, go on Amazon. I know on the Gen Z website, there's also a link to purchase her book as well. So thank you, Emma, for coming on and answering some questions and reading us an excerpt. And thank you to everyone who watched.
Thank you guys. It was so nice being here with you today.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.